Hey guys, what's up? And welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in today, much appreciated. And today we're going to have a discussion, going to sort of give you guys my opinion and sort of an overview of what I've learned about braided fishing line, about when to use it, when not to use it, understanding when it's the most best and efficient, line to use under certain situations, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around braided line. And I'm going to give you guys some foundations to go on based upon what I've experienced with it over the years. Because, braided line's been around forever. I mean, it's been braided. People, back in the 50s and 40s, they used it like a braided Dacron line. And then when monofilament came out, that sort of went away. And it really wasn't until I think it was like 1994, Randy Dearman won the Texas Invitational Bassmaster Tournament down at Sam Rayburn Lake, flipping bushes with braided line. And at that point, nobody used braided line ever. And I remember in that tournament, I fished that tournament, and he was using white braided fishing line, flipping and jigging bushes. And he's talking about the fact that he fished the whole tournament and never retied one time. I think he was using like 80-pound test braided line. And I remember that tournament, watching him fish, and it's like, I can't believe these fish would bite white braided line, in this water clarity. It was probably 2-foot visibility, but it was just the situational, the thick buck brush. It didn't really matter that much. And, he won that tournament doing it. And after he won that tournament, you started seeing some rudimentary companies, different types of braided lines started to come out. Most of it back then, you didn't have a lot of the color options you have now. And braided line has really came a long way over the past 10 years, especially. There's been a lot of technological advances in it as far as the coatings on it, as far as the colors available. And I'm sort of going to give you guys my viewpoint on this. But hey, just one quick reminder before we get started. I want to remind everybody, this coming Thursday, day after tomorrow, Johnny and I have our next our next virtual seminar on fishthemoment.com. We're going to be talking about post-spawn jig fishing. Going to be giving a ton of secrets in there. I'm going to cover the shallow aspect. Johnny's going to cover the deep jigs. I think Johnny said there were 4 or 5 more openings, so you guys can sign up for that by going to fishthemoment.com. So I hope to see you there on that. Okay, I'm going to get into braid line, and I'm going to talk about the situations where I think you need to use it and when I think that you're making a mistake using it. Again, this is my opinion from what that I've found about it. Basically, I use 4 different tests. I use the 50-pound test braid. I'll use the 65-pound test braid, and a 15-pound test braid, and a 20-pound test braid. Once in a while, sometimes I'll use 30-pound test, but not very often. Most of the time, 50 or 65 covers it. So the times that I'm using the braided line, let's start with the heaviest first, the 65-pound test. The only time that I use 65-pound test braid is if I'm punching mats, super thick mats with an ounce to a 2-ounce sinker. Most of the time this is flooded. It's some type of, matted hydrilla, some type of hyacinths, some type of matted stuff, normally in Florida or in the southeast part of the country. A lot of people like to use the 65-pound test for throwing like whopper ploppers and frogs on it. Personally, I don't like that. I think that the diameter of the line reduces the length of the cast you can make. So I stay away from that. So for me, the 65-pound test is strictly for punching and flipping. The 50-pound test is my workhorse for braided line that I'm fishing at. This is probably my favorite pound test, the most that I use it in. And it covers a lot of different range. The 50-pound test is what I throw all my frogs on and all my buzz frogs, like horny toads, that type of stuff. It's super strong. You never break it. The diameter's small enough where you can make really long casts. I can bomb a frog or horny toad out a long way with 50-pound test, and I like the way the bait fishes with that. It seems like it doesn't kill the action. I get a lot of action when I'm walking my frogs with it. It's just a really good line. The other time that I use 50-pound test braided line is if I'm flipping heavy jigs or heavy weights into thick cover, sometimes grass, sometimes not. It can be vegetation. If I'm, for example, say if I'm using like say I'm pitching or punching mats with a smaller bait, like a Zoom speed crawl, and I don't need an ounce weight, maybe I can get by with a 3/4. Sometimes I'll use the 50-pound test braid. But for me, the 50-pound test braid is the one I use a lot on 1-ounce jigs. If I'm flipping and pitching 1-ounce jigs in grass or wood, I use that. And also if I'm pitching or flipping a creature bait in super, super thick bushes, where it is super gnarly, and as soon as the fish hit, they get you hung up. That's the other time I use the 50-pound test braid. I don't like flipping with braid most of the time. You know, we've talked about that before. I prefer flipping with fluorocarbon all the time, but under those situations, I will use the braid on there. Now, the other times that I use the other two tests, and again, I do use 30 and 40 occasionally. Say if I'm fishing, say a smaller frog, or say if I need to make extremely long casts with it, I'll use 30 to 40 once in a while. Also, I'll use 40-pound tests sometimes on a buzz bait. The buzz bait works really good, especially like the 1/4 to 3/8 ounce sizes on 40. Fish that casts a little bit better. If I'm using a 1/2 ounce buzz bait, or a big full-size buzz bait, I may go to 50-pound test braided line, but I do throw my buzzers on braided line too. Now the lighter fluorocarbons, the 15s and the 20s, this is what I use all the time on my spinning outfits, on floating worms and flukes. If you guys have followed my channel very much, you know that I don't use braid to fluorocarbon. Like with the knot, like with an FG knot, for, all your finesse tactics like wacky worm, shaky head drop shot. I don't like the braided fluorocarbon. I think there's a lot of disadvantages to it. You refer back to some of my other videos about that. I think the advantages of straight fluorocarbon on spinning outfit far outweigh the braid to fluorocarbon. And again, I've done a lot of videos on that in the past, so you could refer back. But the times that I do use the 20 and the 15-pound test are on floating worms and flukes. And what I'll do on this is I'll rig up my main line. If I'm fishing heavier cover with a little bit more stained water, I go with the 20. If I'm fishing open water, I go with the 15. I'll rig it up on a barrel swivel with like a 2-foot long leader of 10 to 12-pound test fluorocarbon on it. And I'll fish the floating worm and the fluke like that. And the only reason that I do this is because of the casting distance and hooking power that the braided line will give me on a bait like a floating worm and a fluke, where I have to actually penetrate a larger hook. A lot of times on those particular baits, I'm using a little bit larger hooks. You're dealing with more plastic to have to deal with. It's not like fishing a drop shot or something where you don't have much penetration need. But if I'm fishing a fluke or floating worm, a lot of times I'm fishing it around some type of heavier cover. I need to be able to move that fish, and that's why I use the braided line for that. And the swivel is necessary on a floating worm or a fluke, because they'll twist the heck out of your line if you don't use a swivel on them. So use a swivel all the time, even if I'm using fluorocarbon there. So I think the big mistake that guys make is they become over-reliant with braid. The biggest mistake, number one, that I see that people make with braid is they flip it too much. They tend to get in this mode where they flip braided line all the time in about any situation. And I know that you can argue, everybody's seen Greg Hackney. I know Greg Hackney is a big-time braid flipper. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Greg Hackney. I think he's one of the top anglers on the planet, and he's definitely at the top of the game in flipping. But that's not helping Greg get any more bites. Sorry, Greg, but the braided line is not helping you get any more bites. It may help you land the bites that you're getting, but it's definitely not generating more strikes for you by using straight braid. So I think a lot of people, they use braid too much. I see co-anglers doing this. They'll be pitching, a creature bait on a 1/4 ounce sinker around boat docks on braid. And you simply don't need that. If anything, it's going to take away the amount of strikes that you get. And I'm all about my philosophy in fishing is you have to get the bite first, and then you can worry about getting the fish in once you get their bite. So I don't want to ever use braid if I think it's going to take away from my ability to generate a strike. And I think it does when you're flipping and pitching. unless you're flipping like where your bait's over something in super thick water, that type of a thing. I've also seen people use braid on crankbaits. Guys, you don't ever want to use braid on crankbait. That is the absolute worst thing you can do. I see people, the guys I take out on the water lessons, they use braided fluorocarbon on a jerkbait. I've seen them use braided fluorocarbon on crankbaits. You don't want to do that. You need that stretch on certain bait categories like crankbaits and jerkbaits. You're going to lose a lot of fish by going to the braided fluorocarbon. And finally, the biggest mistake I see a lot of anglers use, and I know that I irritate a lot of people when I say this, is they use braided fluorocarbon too much for their finesse techniques. I think, we've been over this before, so I don't want to, beat a dead horse on this, but I just think that by using braided fluorocarbon on a spinning outfit for your finesse techniques, a lot of times your leader winds up too short. People get a little bit hesitant or lazy about retying enough because they have to mess with retying the leader and the main line both. So that it tends to make you not retie as much. And the shorter your leader gets on braided fluorocarbon, the more the braid becomes visible to the fish. And in a finesse situation, that's just not good. Almost everybody I take out on these trips, I'm going to guess 80% of the instructional trips I do, guys are using braided fluorocarbon, and most of them, by the time I'm done at the end of the day, I've got them convinced to use straight fluorocarbon. So that's another element to it. But anyway, that's my take on braided line, guys. You may have a different opinion on it. This is what I have seen myself off of hundreds of days on the water using it and experimenting with it. Like I said, it's got its place, and it's got the time that you need to spool it up, and it's got time you don't need to spool it up. And that just sort of comes with, experience and knowing when to use it and when not to. So anyway, guys, thanks for tuning into the video. Much appreciated. If you like the video, please hit that like button. It really helps out. And subscribe if you haven't. And we'll be back tomorrow with another one. See you.